Okay, welcome everybody to our discussion about care and writing across the curriculum. Today we're joined by Talia Schaffer. Talia Schaffer is a distinguished professor of English at Queen's College CUNY and the Graduate Center CUNY, whose work focuses on gender, disability, care, and domesticity in the Victorian novel. She is the author of Communities of Care, The Social Ethics of Victorian Fiction, published by Princeton University Press in 2021. Romance's Rival, Familiar Marriage in Victorian Fiction, published by Oxford University Press in 2016. Novelcraft, Victorian Domestic Handicraft in 19th Century Fiction, published by Oxford University Press in 2011. And The Forgotten Female Aesthetes, literary culture on late Victorian England, published by University Press of Virginia in 2000, along with several edited collections, most recently Care and Disability, forthcoming with Routledge in February 2025. And she can be reached at talia.schaffer65 at login.cuny.edu. So thank you so much for joining myself, Valerie Fryer-Davis, and Natasha Tiniacos, your WAC fellows at Hostos. So thank you for joining us today, Talia.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you for inviting me. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
And so the first question that we had for you is just a general sort of pedagogy question. So how does your pedagogy approach incorporate disability frameworks and care?
Yeah, it's a great question. I want to take them separately. So disability frameworks, obviously, one of the things I try to do is model when somebody needs an accommodation, being eager to provide that accommodation and doing it with pleasure and making it look easy. If I have somebody with visual impairments, I just provide screen readable versions. And I stress it's for everybody. Somebody might prefer an OCR version for their own reasons. But I want to model for the students in the class that accommodating everybody in the class is an act of kind of joyous, creative inclusiveness that we should all rush to do and not just see it as a kind of legal requirement. But one of the things about care that I find really interesting is that care is not just for disabled people. Care is the definition of care that I give in my book is that care is meeting another's need. So teaching with care is really about sussing out the student's needs and trying to meet them. And that is like an endlessly fascinating process. And it's something that, I can certainly talk more about how I do that and what I try to do and what I try not to do. But the point is that it's value neutral. Whatever students need is what I want to meet. And it doesn't have to be disability at all. And I need to be open to a wide range of possible needs. So those are two very different things.
Thank you, Professor Schaffer. No, we're very fortunate, and it's my time to welcome you as well. And also, we were wondering if you could tell us a little bit how did you become involved in this research?
So yeah, I'd be happy to. So in the book I wrote before my care book was called Romance's Rival, and it was about rethinking the marriage plot, which is the central plot in 19th century fiction. And one of them that a lot of critics have noticed in the 19th century novel is that there are a ton of plots where a woman marries a disabled man, most famously in Jane Eyre. And the way that critics had previously thought about this was to say, well, the men are symbolically feminized, that this is like a symbolic castration of some kind, which is, obviously like a horrible way to see it for many, many reasons. And I was really did not want to do that reading at all. And so I said, what if we practice disability gain, which is the idea that disability adds something? It doesn't detract or, it's not saying that the men are weaker and more in tune with women. It's giving something new. And when I looked at it, what I realized is that the men who were after the women in these plots, like Rochester, tended to be very predatory, sexually predatory, and they endangered the women. And that being disabled accustomed them to a different kind of touch, a kind of tender nursing touch that felt safer and more nurturing for the woman they were pursuing, and that entering into a relationship with disabled men would offer these women a vision of a much more constructive, mutually accommodating, kind of mutually caring relationship. And that was disability gain. And what I thought was, there's got to be some theory about this. And I discovered this thing called Ethics of Care by looking in the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. And I was like, oh, that sounds interesting. And I just started reading about it.
So, wondering if you could speak a little bit more about how you connect your interests in literature and pedagogy through that disability and care framework.
Yeah, sure. So there's so much to say. And also, I do want to tell people that the epilogue to Communities of Care is actually about this. So if you want to know more about it, look at the epilogue because I like lay out how can you teach with care. And so I can tell you how I do it, and then I can give you some warnings about maybe how not to do it. But if you're thinking care is about meeting the other's need, the students may think their need is to get a good grade, and that may be their need, and maybe we should respect that as a legitimate aim that we have to then be in discourse with. But maybe their need is deeper. Maybe their need is to be heard. Maybe their need is to be validated as thinkers. Maybe their need is to be looked at in the eye and told, you are really good at this, which is something that many of our students have not heard from authority figures. So sometimes figuring out the need is a complicated process of sympathetically deducing it, talking to the student, a student who might, I mean, I just had a situation where a student brought me a paper that was written by ChatGPT. And in the past, my impulse would have been like, you cheated, F. And I said, I can't accept this. This wasn't written by you. Let's think about, how to get you moving do you want to rewrite this? Like, and here's why it's important for this to be in your own voice. And she thanked me. And I think her need was to be told that her voice was valuable. So once you know what their need is, then you can try to meet it. And the only way to do that is through dialogue constantly. So sometimes that can take the form of doing things like anonymous polls or just asking them. Yesterday, I went into my class and I was like, we're spending 3 days on working on your final paper here, just in writing instruction. We do have room for one more text if you want something else to write about. And some of you expressed an interest in a Christmas carol. How many of you would rather spend those days on a Christmas carol? And we discussed it, and some of them thought like they would like to write on a Christmas carol, but most of them said, I want the writing instruction. So just checking in with them constantly, but dialogue is at the core of teaching with care or any care relation, because if you don't ask the other what they need, and if you don't train the other to speak that need, then what you're doing is projecting what you think their need is on them. And that is the way to a disaster. If you think you know what they need, and you are trying to, or you think they know what they're all about, and you are trying to provide it without any kind of indication of what's really going on, you're not meeting their need. They're going to resent it.
Talking about that, Professor Schaffer, what role does adaptability and flexibility have in your teaching method, especially when teaching in different modalities to different embodied corporalities? And how does your teaching style change for different modalities? I remember being your student in the peak of the pandemic.
That's right. Yeah. So obviously I try to be flexible, but I would say the one constant is trying to respect and appreciate my students. And a lot of this, one of the things I say about care is that it's performative, in the sense that if you care is an act, not a feeling. Caring is the feeling, but care is the act. And if you act as if you really appreciate and value your students, no matter how you privately feel, although I hope that we all privately do feel that, but acting like that makes it come true. You cannot verbally appreciate something with over and over again for the space of a semester without that happening in your own heart. But in terms of different modalities, so obviously the classroom is a communal space, but I try to create spaces for individual learning. I write lots of comments on papers. I schedule individual conferences with people. I understand that, some of my learners, especially those who are neurodivergent, might not be comfortable speaking in class or might not be comfortable doing in-class writing. And, so they'll say, can I finish this at home? Absolutely, you can. Just email it to me. I have email conversations with people. Natasha, when you were in my class, I think we use Slack. I don't really do that anymore, but I try to have different platforms. One of the things I also try to respect is that students are often, at least at CUNY, are often, in my experience, quite scared of a lot of different technological platforms. So I try to make it as easy as possible. I try to have all the readings linked from a syllabus, which is on Google Docs, so that I can update the syllabus constantly, and they can just click on the syllabus and it gets them to the reading. No intermediary. I try to give information that is always both visual and auditory. So like a handout or something projected on a screen, but then I'll read it aloud. Um, I haven't done this much this semester, but I'll often bring in something tactile to pass around the room, especially if I'm teaching, because I teach about a different culture. And so it's really cool to be like, this is what a starched collar feels like. Imagine wearing that. What would it feel like to wear that? Or, here is what an iron was like. Imagine holding this. What would it be like if you had to use this on clothing? So tactile things like that as well. So trying to speak to every kind of sensory need, trying to appreciate and accommodate the students wherever they are, and trying to kind of, well, one of the things I say in communities of care is that care works best when it operates in multiple capacities at once. So if it's like sensory, emotional, intellectual, trying to do that myself, trying to be kind of an orchestra in myself, not just one voice, but to like satisfy people across the board in as many ways as I can, which, as you know, is a challenge at CUNY where, the heating is broken and the tables don't work and whatever. It's not necessarily a comfortable space. So you have to try to find other ways to create a sense that they are cared for that isn't necessarily always physical the way we would like.
A lot of our professors are going to be teaching, a lot of our faculty are going to be teaching writing. And so I'm just wondering how you embody this community of care while teaching writing.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's a great question. So one of the things about writing is, as you know, it's usually a solitary activity. And so how do you make that caregiving? So I'm teaching a writing class right now, and here's what I'm doing. And I redesigned my writing practice because of because of AI, but I really like the way I'm doing it now, and I think it spurred me to think of some new innovations. So every week they do a piece of in-class writing at the end of class where they are supposed to do a close reading of or a response to a specific item or line of text. I'll print it out and write comments, and then I give it back to them in class. They feel like they've gotten a little gift. I'm finding students today are really into kind of retro physical paper. And they're like, oh, look at that. And so they do that every week while we read a text. And then so they've accumulated like two or three of them. And then we have a day in class where I do an expansion where they have to create use one of those readings to create a kind of quasi outline, although I don't call it an outline. I say, what do you want to prove? What are three ways you can prove it? What are, 3 to 5 ways you can prove it or whatever? What are some moments in the text that you can use to prove it? What are some ways to complicate it? The kinds of questions you ask to get them to expand something. They do that on a shared Google Doc so everybody can see it. And I put them in groups and they share it with each other and comment on each other. So that is explicitly designed to be a communal thing, although the initial reading response is kind of a private thing between them and me, although I also provide a Google Doc, so they have the option of showing it to the rest of the class if they want. So what I'm trying to do is build in times for dialogue, for them to express what they want to do on the paper, for communal work with the rest of the class. I change those groups for every paper, so they work with somebody throughout the semester. Oh, and one last thing I'll say is that when they do the reading responses, I read aloud some really cool ones in class, and I keep a running list for myself of which ones I've read to make sure that everybody gets a turn to be read aloud. So trying to create that kind of stir among, among the students is, I think, really helpful, feeling valued.
That's fantastic. And I think some of those ideas can be woven into this next question that is, I mean, for the people who want to adopt and the instructors, especially writing instructors that want to adopt these strategies. What practical strategies would you suggest to an instructor that is learning to implement ethics of care for the first time? What would you
So
suggest?
yeah, no, that's a great question. I wish that was a question that somebody had answered for me when I started teaching. Um, I think first of all, come into the class with a kind of open mind about what the students might want and try to find different ways to hear what the students want, to engage in that dialogue. Try to create an atmosphere in the class, as I said, sometimes by yourself initiating a put down of the material to enable them to feel comfortable expressing honestly how they feel. I just taught Silas Marner, which they ended George Eliot's short novel, which they ended up loving. It's a novel entirely about care, but the opening of it is excruciatingly boring. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is so boring. And then they could come in and they like, yeah, how do we get through this? We talked about strategies and so forth. So the preemptive put down is a good technique. As I said, another technique I use a lot is justifying and articulating my own teaching decisions along the way so that students accept it. And the other thing I would say is that, and this is something that, is I said I would talk about what people do that doesn't work. One of the things I find is that people are so eager to shift to a community of care that they basically, instructors will often put down their own authority and be like, they're just one of the students. They're going to sit in the back. The students are going to lead the class. I think it's very tempting to want everybody in the class to be like everybody's buddy and be on the same level, but you're the teacher. You're never going to be on their level. And so you just have to embrace that. And your job is a facilitator of their care community. You are not a member of their care community.
We were wondering why you believe an ethic of care to be so important when teaching CUNY students and coming from that context of, working class families,
Mhm.
large communities of color in our system. Why is that so important in this system?
Yeah. So I was thinking about that question. Um, I think to start with something personal, it's much more meaningful for me to do it with CUNY students because they haven't gotten that necessarily in their past. They may have gone to like a big city high school, they may have been kind of moved along, they may not have gotten a lot of personal attention. And for me, it's just supremely gratifying to be able to look at a person and say, I love the way you do this. I see you're really good at that. I love hearing your voice. You have a voice that, does this kind of work on the page. And to see them being sort of smitten with gratitude and excitement that somebody has validated their abilities. I also think it's a political act. And as I was thinking about this, I went back to my book because I quote Bell Hooks on this. And she has this lovely passage where, and I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I'm just going to read a little bit of it. She says, teachers who care, who serve their students, are usually at odds with the environments wherein we teach. More often than not, we work in institutions where knowledge has been structured to reinforce dominator culture. And so what we're doing when we give care is working against that dominator culture, working against the culture of assessment, of marking them down, suspecting they're going to cheat, thinking the worst of them. We are recognizing them as fellow members of a community whose needs matter. And I think that is supremely important for CUNY students, but also for CUNY faculty, because we too often get demoralized or beaten down by bad conditions, by classrooms that are, in disrepair, by tech that doesn't work. And so as I said, care is performative. If you put it out constantly that you are caring, your students give it back to you. They take it in and they give it back to you. And so, when things are hard, when things are hard politically in the world, to have a classroom that is a space that you have created or you have not created, but fostered and encouraged to be a space of mutual respect is very healing for the instructor. And like right now in November, in early November, my favorite place to be is in my classroom because it's just like, oh, I feel like happy here. I feel like all the appreciation and respect I've been putting out has now kind of, I don't know, is now hanging in the air. And this is now like a happy space for everybody.
No, I'm also in gratitude with you for joining us and sharing your knowledge and also sharing how you incorporate your research into the classroom and your pedagogy. And for our hostess community, I know they will be grateful as well listening to you as a fellow CUNY professor.
Oh, well, thank you. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to share this with Hostos. Since I'm not at Hostos, this is really an honor to be able to speak to them. And if you want more, the epilogue to my book has more tips in it. So, you can go on and look at that.
Perfect. Thank you so
Thank you.
much.
Thank you.